Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Our guest today is Dr. Dave Janda, host of the popular Operation Freedom radio show. Dr. Janda is a retired orthopedic surgeon based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He was also appointed by the former Bush administration to the board of the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. Dr. Janda also authored the book, The Awakening of a Surgeon, and we're delighted to have him here today as our guest. Good day, Dr. Janda, and welcome to SBTV. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's an honor to be with you, Patrick. I appreciate all that you do to try to educate and empower every person that's willing to listen.
Thanks, Dr. Dave. Likewise, you're doing a really great job. I understand you're an orthopedic surgeon, or you have been for some 32 years. And you've said before in other interviews that you chose to retire because of certain aspects of the Affordable Care Act, ACA, otherwise known as Obamacare. And it became difficult for you to continue practicing medicine. So in that light, could you share with us a bit more on the details of what happened and why retirement was an option you chose?
Well, it's an excellent question. It was hard for me to do. I had dedicated my life to taking care of people as an orthopedic surgeon, as a physician, as a surgeon. I did that for 32 years of my life. Oh. And it was a very important part of my life in being able to help people. I still believe I help people just a little bit differently in how I administer the medicine, if you will, administer the treatment. The treatment now being information that's not bought and paid for like we see in the bought-off lamestream fake media, but to try to provide a platform through davejanda.com and my radio show Operation Freedom that gives people information that I believe the globalist-controlled media does not provide. Early in my career, in addition to my work in orthopedic surgery, I started working in healthcare policy. And this actually came about by accident. I had been working a lot in developing operations to help people as an orthopedic surgeon, but also my research was focused on trying to prevent people from getting injured in the first place. And one of our studies that got a lot of national and international attention, we found a way to prevent 1.7 million people from preventing their injuries every year and save $2 billion in healthcare costs every year. We spent $1,000 on that series of studies, Patrick, and it got a lot of national attention. They actually got the attention of then President Reagan. It was toward the end of his term, 1988. I received a call from the president's office asking me if I'd be interested in working in healthcare policy, focusing on prevention and wellness. I ended up going to Washington and working with C. Everett Koop, the then Surgeon General of the United States, on healthcare policy and prevention. So I had a interest in healthcare policy. I had done that toward the end of the Reagan administration. We focused on free market reforms. One of the real problems right now is that many of the things we were speaking about in 1988 about health savings accounts, which were then called medical IRAs, increased utilization of primary care physicians, now called direct primary care, having insurance companies compete rather than collude, selling insurance across state lines, focusing on prevention and wellness, setting up pre-existing condition pools so that people would not go uncovered that had pre-existing conditions. These are all issues we were working with C. Everett Koop on back in '88, and Reagan was very responsive to that. Once he left office and George Bush the first came in, he was actually more interested in big pharmaceutical companies, big medicine like the AMA, and big insurance companies. And our issues, free market reform, were kind of put on the back burner. We also saw that when we tried to reintroduce this with Bill Clinton when he took power, again, got pushed to the back, more interested in big insurance, big medicine, big AMA. That's where they were getting all their money from. And at that point, and this is many years ago, Patrick, I concluded that really there's one political party in the United States. I call them the Republicrats. They are owned and operated by big business, and there's an incestuous relationship between big business and big government. And I noticed that as far back as starting back in 1989. And it's only gotten worse from there. When George Bush II came in, again, we tried to bring our free market reforms to the forefront. They got pushed aside again for the same reason with his dad and with Bill Clinton. And of course, Barack Obama, forget about it. But Barack Obama was all about big government and not empowering individuals. And our approach really cut the legs out of big insurance, big pharmaceutical companies, big medicine, which is why it was shoved on the back burner. Throughout those 30 years, Patrick, I had a background in healthcare policy. And over those 30 years, I would be contacted by people in Washington to come in and look at different healthcare plans. For example, back in '92, Senator Dole, who was the majority leader in the Senate at the time, asked me and another individual to come in and look at Hillary Care and analyze it. And we did. And there was a little bit of good in Hillary Care, but there was a lot of bad. And in particular, it stripped people of their health care freedom because it put government bureaucrats in charge of decision making. Very similar to Obamacare.
Yeah, I've always I've always felt Obamacare was actually Hillary Care 2.0.
Oh, well, you know what? You're absolutely correct, and that's a very insightful comment. The vast majority of folks in our country right now, Patrick, will say, well, wait a minute, Obamacare was about gutting the insurance industry. No, wait. In fact, the insurance industry wrote Obamacare, and this is one of the reasons why I left. So as time went on, and as I started analyzing now Obamacare, I realized it was Hillary Care 2.0. That it did not empower people. It did not give people their health care freedom. It actually oppressed people. It would cause health care to become even more unaffordable, unavailable, not quality oriented. And granted, we need health care reform. Yeah. We need health care reform. But health care reform that empowers people, that focuses on prevention and wellness, that focuses on insurance companies rather than colluding but competing, about making it so that the finances are put back in the hands of the people rather than the hands of some bureaucrat who has no functional medical knowledge or the hands of an insurance executive who also has no functional medical knowledge. So as I started going through and analyzing Obamacare, it showed me a timeline. And the timeline was starting in January 1st of 2017. This is where the universal acceptance or utilization of electronic medical records are going to be put into place. Now, everybody says, well, that's good. Everything's electronic. That can be good, but that can be bad. Because part of the legislation said, as a physician, every patient you saw, you not only had to send them to the insurance company where they were getting their benefits from, you had to send it to the government without their knowledge. And that the government had 24/7 access to their records. Now, for 32 years, I practiced medicine, and we used paper records.
Yeah.
And we guarded those records like a fort. Those records could not be breached. They were records between my patient and myself. And yes, we would pass on diagnostic codes to the insurance companies so they would be able to reimburse patients, reimburse for the payment structure. We get it. But those notes were critical for our doctor-patient relationship. And from the very beginning, it became very obvious that Obamacare would destroy the doctor-patient relationship because it made the doctor in a position of being a gatekeeper of information that was then funneled to the government. Much of that information the government had no reason to have. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that part of the legislation, they kicked in these protocols that a certain person comes to you with a condition. And with that condition and with that diagnostic code, you are going to do A, B, and C. Well, wait a minute. I've been doing this 30 years. I know A isn't going to work. C is too much. We're going to start with B. Because I would start with B and not A that the government protocol wanted, I would not be a meaningful user of the system, which means that I could be penalized and punished for doing what was right for that patient as opposed to what the government wanted. This is the reason why there was recently a study that came out that was also published in Zero Hedge. They reported on it, not in the bought-off lamestream fake media, about the fact that doctors are burning out at record numbers. The reason is is because docs are being put in a position of turning over information they know they have no business turning over to the government. And that doctors are being put in the position of instituting these protocols when they know their training has told them to do something different. Now, I'm an old guy. So back on January 1st of 2017, I said, I'm not going to play in this sandbox that's been created by a bunch of government bureaucrats who are exerting control over patients and provide. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's when I retired. Now, I had started my radio show, Operation Freedom, back in October 2010. And I had been doing healthcare policy for a number of different organizations, entities in Washington, consulting. And I decided back in 2010, we need to get a platform out to people that's not bought and paid for by the bought-off lamestream fake media that's essentially an arm of the globalist syndicate. So a very long answer to your precise question, the reason why I left medicine, something that I'd loved doing, was because the government involvement, the incestuous relationship between big government and big business was going to force me to practice in a means of which I felt was inappropriate and I believe in my own mind unethical. And I could never do that. And that is why I left the practice of medicine.
You've seen how the United States has changed as a country in the last few decades or so. But looking back through these decades, how different is the U.S. of today compared to, say, the U.S. of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s in terms of individual freedom?
Well, okay. So I'm going to use a term that's going to get me in trouble. Okay. At one point back in 2010, I was asked by Congress to speak at a congressional dinner at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on healthcare policy and prevention and wellness. And oh, by the way, this is actually in 2009. It was after the passage of the stimulus bill, and it was before the passage of the healthcare bill in March of 2010. I believe they were asking me to speak there in July of 2009. And so at the end of my presentation about healthcare policy, where we've come over the decades, where it needs to go to empower people, as opposed to government, empowering insurance companies. And I talked about prevention and wellness. And I talked about Obamacare. And one of the congressmen stood up at the end of my presentation and said, Dr. Janda, I have a question. We have these Sunday morning talk shows, and I'm going to be a guest on all these talk shows, on all these TV networks. If they ask me what's the one word to describe Obamacare, what should I say? And this is after I spoke about the punitive aspect of it, how it penalizes patients, it penalizes physicians that aren't willing to go along with the system. Remember, if you don't sign for Obamacare, you are going to be penalized as a patient. Okay? And if you're a doc and you don't go along with their protocols, you're going to be penalized, as we've talked about. And I started to channel my mom about, because she was a history teacher. What would mom say? Malignant, horrible. And as a history teacher, then I thought about something she taught me. The incestuous relationship between big business and big government, along with authoritarian nationalism that penalizes and punishes anyone and everyone who doesn't go along with the state. That's the definition of fascism. Yeah. So I looked at this congressman and I said, Congressman, I'm going to give you a very unpopular answer, but it's a truthful answer. If you are asked what's the one word to describe Obamacare, the answer is fascist. It's the same answer I'm going to give you, Patrick. In what has changed for me growing up in the 1960s to where we are today in 2018, I believe our country has become more fascist. An incestuous relationship, ever increasing, between big government and big business. Also, authoritarian nationalism that penalizes and punishes anyone and everyone who opposes the state.
The government's involvement with healthcare, is it a form of, at the very least, socialism?
When government gets involved in healthcare delivery, there is a socialism aspect to it. Yeah. But when in my mind, when it starts to become fascist, is when you start to get the punitive aspect involved, penalizing citizens for not having the policy government wants you to have, punishing physicians and not going along with the treatment protocols that they know might be wrong, but they still have to do it unless they're going to get punished if they don't. That's where it gets to be fascist.
Dr. Janda, they do say health is wealth. And so moving on to wealth, the national debt right now, I think we're at about 21 trillion or so. That's what they say, but still counting. And a recent report by the Treasury Department showed that the federal deficit soared last year another 779 billion or so. Despite the good that the Trump administration is doing in the economy with deregulations and tax cuts, do you think Trump and the current administration will be able to solve the debt problem?
No.
That's
I
a
think it's
quick answer.
yeah, I know. I don't mean to be curt. I think it's unsolvable.
Yeah.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? When you mentioned I think where you said 21.5 trillion, that's just the published number.
Yes.
When you start taking unfunded liabilities, unfunded mandates, we're looking at many $1 trillion higher. But you know what? And this is some information that was passed on to me by Rob Kirby, another guest in our show from Toronto. Rob's a brilliant guy.
Yeah, he is. Hope to get him one
And
day.
Rob said, Dave, you had Skidmore on your show, and you were talking about how these government accounting practices recently changed, and now everything can be hidden under national security. I go, yeah. Because that's pretty bad, isn't it? I go, yeah, it's really bad. He goes, do you know that has been in place since 1934 when it comes to the private sector? I said, what? And he sent me some information. Back in 1934, they amended a version of the Securities and Exchange Act. They amended it. Here's what they said. With respect to matters concerning the national security of the United States, the president or the head of the executive branch agency may exempt companies from certain private companies, critical legal obligations. These obligations including keeping accurate books, records, and accounts, and maintaining a system of internal accounting controls sufficient to ensure the propriety of financial transactions and the preparation of financial statements in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. That was in 1934. But the story changes. So the president, since 1934, could say to a private company, you got some problems. We need you to do something for the government here, but what we're going to do is we're going to call it national security and you're protected, okay?
Yeah.
But something happened, and that was in 2006. In May of 2006, Rob passed this on to me as well. In 2006, George Bush instituted an order. And what he did is he transferred the presidential privilege of telling a company, we'll just call this national security. He transferred that to the intelligence czar. Okay? And so essentially, as Rob puts it, and I believe he's accurate, what Bush did 2 years before the financial crash, he transferred the power from the president, the executive branch, to the intelligence community that's run by the deep state. They can determine on the private sector who gets their books washed and make it look like national security. Yeah. So the point is that what I'm telling you is based on this 1934 Act and then what Bush did. We have a private sector that's smoke and mirrors. It's vapor, right? Because the books, you're allowed to fudge the books. And now we know from Skidmore in 2018, the government changed their accounting practices, and now they're allowed to whitewash the books, to fudge the books, without penalty.
Yeah.
What this tells me, Patrick, is our financial system, including the $21 trillion of debt, which is not 21 trillion, it's far greater than that, is a sham.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's a Ponzi scheme and it's a sham. And shams don't go on forever.
Okay. So if we're never going to clear this debt, do you think we're going to default on it? Do you think it'll hyperinflate? Or is there some way we could get the economy going to at least try and pay it down?
I think Donald Trump is the president of the United States for a reason. Donald Trump's background is in bankruptcy.
Yeah, it is.
The United States is bankrupt. I think he's there for a reason. I think he's there to oversee the bankruptcy of the United States. And if you look at how Trump handles bankruptcies,
He does pretty good.
he does pretty good, right? But what does he do? Does he default? Yeah. Does he hyperinflate? Probably will. Does he try to grow out of it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But growing alone is not going to clear it up. And my guess it's going to be a combination of everything.
Okay.
But that does mean default, and that does mean hyperinflation.
Yeah. But do you think that's why in part, maybe he's trying to restructure all of these trade agreements in preparation for this bankruptcy that you see?
I do, and I also believe this is why in the last week, who's he been pointing at? Direct quote, Patrick. Trump blames Powell, the head of the Fed. Quote, I think the Fed has gone crazy. Quote, I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy. Or how about this one from night before last? Quote, my biggest threat is the Fed. Quote, my biggest threat is the Fed, he said during an interview with Fox Business, because the Fed is raising rates too fast and it's too independent. Now, Patrick, many people go, Fed independent? He says things for a reason. I know people say, the guy's kind of off. No, he says things for a reason. So when he says the Fed is independent, everybody goes, what's he talking about? Well, here's what he's talking about, of which 99% of the American public does not know. The Fed is not part of the executive branch, the legislative branch, or the judicial branch. It is an independent organization, right, that's owned and operated by the criminal international banking syndicate, period. Has been, and they took control of our money supply back in 1913. And what's the Rothschild quote? I don't care about who wins the elections, just give me the control of the money, right?
Right. Yeah, you know that Dr. Janda, that's one thing I've always wondered, where we have the judicial branch. We just had this Kavanaugh hearing. We don't privatize our judicial system. Why are we privatizing our monetary system?
That's a great question. And that's a question, it is a question, Patrick, that should have been asked in 1913. Yeah. And it wasn't. When was the Federal Reserve Act passed? Close to midnight on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, that it was, yes.
Well, let's face it. The internet wasn't around in 1913, right? No, I mean, there was no means. Essentially, the means of communication was minimal at best. Yeah. There was no TV. Yeah. Radio was, it was all newsprint. And that's how they pulled this off.
Yeah.
And they're doing everything in their power to make sure. And this is where I think Trump is taking on, because the Fed, I believe, is a tentacle of the deep state, of the globalist syndicate. There's no doubt in my mind. And this is why I believe Trump is cognizant that a bankruptcy, a reset, if you want to call it, if you want to market it a little better, is imminent. And this is why in the past week, Trump has been relentless at pointing the finger at the Fed, saying they're the problem, they're the enemy, they're the threat, When was the last time you heard a president say that?
Do you think the next market crash is near, and how severe do you think it's going to be?
Well, I can only tell you what the people that are financial gurus that come on my show. The Rob Kirby's of the world, the Bill Holters, the Ed Steers, these are people that base their information on data. Not, well, let me put my finger in the wind and see which way we're going here. They also don't base their information on propaganda, just hard numbers. And every single one of them believes that a crash is in the cards, and sooner rather than later. And David Stockman said this recently, and I read this quote to a number of these financial guests, and they all agree with it. This is what Stockman said, former director of management and budget under Reagan. Quote, "We're nearing the end. I think the world economy is plunging into an unprecedented deflation recession period of shrinkage that will bring down all the markets around the world that have been vastly overvalued as a result of this massive money printing and liquidity flow into Wall Street and other financial markets. I think it's more of an insurance," and then he goes on about, in particular, gold. I think precious metals. I think it's more of an insurance policy and an option on the ultimate failure of today's form of central banking. When finally the Keynesians, who are running all the central banks, when they are totally repudiated, I think gold will soar in value. End quote. And I don't have reason to disagree with him. When it all falls apart, people go to what's always been seen as a store of value, and that's precious metals.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at what's happened in Venezuela, right?
Oh, yeah.
Looking at Iran.
Yeah.
They're not going to paper currency that they can, flush down the toilet because it's just worth it, or just like it was in Weimar Germany.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, because I think one thing people back in the States, maybe they don't realize. They look at the gold price, they see the gold price, it's not doing so good, it's going down. But what they don't realize is in other parts of the world, against their different currencies, gold has gone up. And it's mainly in the U.S. that it hasn't particularly gone up. So the rest of the world, they're seeing gold storing their wealth, and they understand it.
You're completely on track. And in fact, I can tell you that whether it's Fox Business News, CNBC, what I call CNBS, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, whether it's Bloomberg or Reuters, the propaganda that has force-fed to the American citizens on a 24/7 basis is buy the dip, put your money in paper products, put your money in stocks, in bonds. Oh, and that gold and silver, that's for these prepper people. They're crazy. They're conspiracy theorists. And in fact, the media, which is run by the globalist syndicate, does everything in their power to push people away from precious metals. They will never do a story. Patrick, on what's happening with the price of gold and silver or other precious metals around the world. I mean, watching Ted Butler's analysis and the like, he's saying that J.P. Morgan Chase, in May of 2011, when silver was close to $50 an ounce, essentially had 0 ounces in their vault system. And with their paper shenanigans and criminal manipulation of the silver and gold market, over the ensuing 7 years, according to Ted, they've now accumulated over 750 million ounces of just silver.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you something. Jamie Dimon is not just accumulating this stuff because he thinks, well, I'll just give it to the government and to the people when all heck breaks loose. He's doing it for the biggest financial windfall in his and his company's history.
Yeah, that's an ace in the hole for them. Let me ask you something. When the going gets tough for the government with the debt, do you think we'll see a repeat of the gold confiscation like we did from FDR back in 1933, where citizens were required to turn in their gold by law?
Yeah, that's always a concern, but I think where they'll go first, which is because not that much of the American public owns gold and silver. A very small percentage, maybe 1%, 2%, 3%. Here's where they're going to go to confiscate wealth: IRAs and 401ks.
Ooh.
That is where they're going to go. And the reason is because it's in paper form and it's electronic form. They can get their hands on it easier. And they learned a lesson back in the 30s where a lot of people didn't turn in their gold. And they said, "Come get it, big boy. Let's see how it goes." Now, what they did do is they did try to get in some people's bank, in their safety deposit boxes and the like. Right. But the very small percentage of people that own gold and silver in the United States don't put it in a safety deposit box. They don't. So I think the easiest fruit for them to pick is that where they're going to go first. If they're going to confiscate anything, they're going to go for 401ks and IRAs.
With it surely looks like socialism is on the horizon. Do you think U.S. citizens should plan to hold some wealth outside of the U.S. in a friendlier jurisdiction, given the disastrous fiscal state of the country and the potential threat of confiscation?
I do. I think it's a wise move. Now, here's the problem. Making sure that they are associated with reputable people.
Right.
Right? Because we've seen this time and time again where folks get the right idea and they go, okay, I don't like what I'm seeing and hearing and reading or through the alternative media, because I'm getting none of that from the mainstream fake media. I'm going to institute some changes, let's say financially, and I'm going to divest some assets here in the United States and relocate them offshore.
Right.
Not a bad idea. But they have to make sure they're dealing with reputable people and organizations. And that's where you come in, and that's where your organization comes in. They're making, you guys lay out, here's, and that's key. I think the big problem here in the United States is making people have the decision to buy gold and silver. Yeah. Because when they do make that decision, I can tell you, my listeners on my radio show, they'll go to their broker and they'll go, I'm going to buy some gold and silver. And what that broker does is he pushes them into a paper product.
Yes.
Oh, okay, we're going to buy GMT or SLV. No. That's not physical gold and silver, right? Yeah. So then they say to the broker, well, that's not real gold and silver. That's paper, and I'm going to buy the... Well, the broker gets a commission on how much assets are under management, so the broker's saying, no, don't do that. No, that's conspiracy theory stuff. This is bunker mentality. But finally, when they get their funds separated and they get their money, right, now is where then people have to then make the decision, okay, if I'm going to go offshore with this money, where do I go?
Yeah.
See, and that's the key. And making sure that where they go, it's in the hands of reputable people in reputable jurisdictions.
You've covered a lot. We're surely going to send people to Operation Freedom so they can hear more of your opinions and your work, and definitely we'll be putting in a link to send people your way. And
the link is at davejanda.com, and the radio show airs 2 to 5 Eastern every Sunday. If they hit the listen live button, they can listen for free. We upload a tremendous amount of public information. I host what's called the WTF show, as well as the Insider Insight show on the platform. Those are subscription-based services as well. So we have the free side. We also have a subscription side, $9 a month, 30 cents a day for all of our archives, for all of our shows. And then they could also go to YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, Operation Freedom. I usually put up one free YouTube a week. The vast 95% of our content is housed at davejanda.com, and folks are always welcome there on the public side, or if they so choose to be on a subscription side. As I said, it's $9 a month. It's only a monthly subscription. If they don't like it, they can dump it after a month. But we provide information that the fake media will never go near.
Yeah, fake media. I don't know what else to call them also already. But Dr. Dave Janda, we appreciate your time, and we do wish you all the best, and we're going to follow you, see how you're doing. Keep doing the good work.
Well, we will do the same at our end, Patrick. Thanks for everything that you and your team do.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Dave. Appreciate it very much. That was Dr. Dave Janda, host of the Operation Freedom radio show. For more of his work, visit his website, davejanda.com, or tune in to Operation Freedom on YouTube. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content.